Hi, everybody. Welcome to Humane Voices, the official podcast of the Humane Society of the United States. Carrie and I are here back for another episode. Carrie, you just heard it. So you know that we moved apartments 2 weeks ago, and it's amazing. The apartment's great. We love it over here, but holy cow, during the week, I mean, if you heard it this morning, it was like the dumpster truck back there, the dog was barking. It was like, Toby, stop barking. You could hear the neighbors like across the street.
Nice.
And
Yeah.
I'm like, oh my gosh, we're going to record an episode today. And
Yep.
Chad, our producer, is going to come on and be like, no, this is not usable. So
That sounds like our old place. It's like we lived literally a block from the fire station in Tacoma Park. And
Okay.
so literally all night long, it was ambulances passing within 20 feet of our bedroom. It was great.
it's perfect ambiance for podcast.
Yeah,
podcast.
exactly. It just adds to it adds to the sort of, the reality, the cinema verite of this moment in
Exactly.
times of COVID. Yeah.
Well, let's bring in our third. So our special guest for the show today is Josh Balk, who is the Vice President of Farm Animal Protection for the Humane Society of the United States. Josh,
Welcome back, Josh.
Yeah, round two.
Am I your first time person to come back twice, or has there been anyone else?
Maybe
I think
Kitty came.
Yeah, Kitty, yeah. You and
somehow
Kitty.
agreed again to come back, but I don't know.
Well, I'm looking forward to being your guest next time also. So you're welcome on that.
Make it a three-peat. Yeah,
exactly.
Do that.
Well, we'll see how you do today.
Okay, the
Just
pressure's on.
don't count your chickens. You see what I did there? Ha ha.
Absolutely, very good, Carrie.
Yeah,
very good.
Well, Josh, so like you mentioned, there are the sirens. So like we spoke about, back a few episodes when you were on the podcast, we had spoken about with you, and then really in the first season, about the explosion of plant-based foods or alternative foods that are readily available in grocery stores. We're seeing it now with KFC, and they're trying, and a lot of restaurants are engaging in more alternative foods for the public. And so we wanted to start off, get your take on the next steps. What are you seeing in the field right now? And what do you see it being like in the next 5, 10, 15 years?
You're right, Austin. The plant-based movement is growing faster than it ever has. The latest data demonstrates that plant-based meats have skyrocketed to more than 250% growth, which is a pretty remarkable trajectory that we're in. And I think there's a lot of reasons for it. One is that there was already growth even before the COVID-19 outbreak. People were becoming more aware of the environmental impact of meat production, of course, the animal cruelty associated with producing meat, and being healthier by eating more plant-based foods. But when COVID-19 hit, people are starting making even more of a connection between how we live our day-to-day life and how we are treating animals to outbreaks that could eventually harm us. And so there's been just stories in the New York Times, Washington Post, CNN, you name it. The major media outlet has covered how animals are associated somehow with this pandemic, past pandemics, and potentially future pandemics. And so, hey, let's move away from harming animals. Let's realign a relationship with animals to one where there's respect. And at the end, just leave them alone. And that leads to, in our food section, a lot better atmosphere for us to eat foods that are healthier for us, the planet, animals, and of course, in a type of COVID-19 scenario, moving in a direction that is less likely to cause future harm.
Josh, can you talk a little bit? One of the things that's really interesting to me, obviously, as the Humane Society of the United States, our primary concern with meat production and factory farming are the animal suffering issues and the suffering on just this incredibly vast scale. But can you talk a little bit about some of the other reasons that it's good to start thinking about plant-based food? The health thing that you mentioned is really interesting, and I think especially right now, people are really concerned about that. But there's an environmental factor as well, right?
Yeah, you're right on both fronts. In terms of the health factor, the consumption of meat has been linked to the leading causes of death in the United States, heart disease and cancer. And if you strictly care about human health, then it's the only thing you care about. And it's like, hey, I want to live as long as possible. I want to be as healthy as possible. the science shows eat more plant-based foods, reduce our animal product consumption. I mean, this data has been around for decades. It's only increasing. So that is becoming more of just a semblance of reality for people to really grasp that the choices we make with our food is going to dictate our own life a lot more than probably anything else in terms of our health. So that's certainly a major reason why. On the environmental side, it takes 5 pounds of crops to produce 1 pound of chicken. I mean, that is completely inefficient. And so if we want to be efficient with the environment, we always talk about energy efficiency. Well, raising animals for food causes more greenhouse gas emissions and harmful greenhouse gas emissions than all transportation combined. And so how do we talk about efficiency for eating? And so 5 pounds to 1 pound is not efficient. Imagine if my car company would be producing 5 brand new cars only to disassemble to produce 1 car to sell. People would think that's crazy. That doesn't make any sense. Yeah, that's what we're doing every time we're eating chicken, that we could be eating plants directly. And so, yes, absolutely, for the environment, for our health, people are moving this direction. And, what we're also seeing, Carrie, is that even meat companies are seeing that this is the direction that society is going to. Now more than ever, meat companies are invested in plant-based startups, and they're buying plant-based companies. They are producing their own plant-based meats. So even when you have the meat industry seeing this as trajectory, that we have a winning scenario of what the future can look like.
All right, so another big topic that has been making the headlines in addition to plant-based is cultivated meats. So can you explain that a little bit to our audience and what that means?
So, you're right, Austin, is that, there's a lot of buzz about what's called cultivated meat. And so here's what cultivated meat is. As we know right now, we raised animals in factory farms. For chickens, it's about 45 days. So yes, all chicken meat comes from baby chickens. For pigs, it's about 7 months. And for the mother pigs, though, it's for about 4 years confined in a crate. So we're raising animals for months and months on end, only to eventually kill them. And, we eat meat, which is in essence muscle from their flesh. Why go through all of that when really we're just looking just to eat muscle? Why not just grow the muscle directly? And so here's what cultivated meat is it's plucking cells from animals and putting the cells in a nutrient-rich bath, and the cells grow as they would within our own bodies. And instead of having to grow entire animals, especially in horrendous situations like factory farms, we can just grow the muscle tissue itself and eat it directly. Therefore, no animals will have to be harmed. Studies show that it's dramatically better for water savings, for greenhouse gas reduction, for land use savings. It can be better for our health as well. And so for all of those reasons, this seems like a good direction to go. And in fact, I actually have eaten this type of meat before. And I was at a company that's producing this meat, and they gave it out. It was some duck meat. No ducks were harmed in the process whatsoever. And hey, I've been vegetarian since I was 18. So I don't really recall what the taste of duck meat was. But you know what? I thought it was pretty good. And the people around me weren't vegetarian as long as I was, and some weren't vegetarian at all. They thought it was good too. So I think that's the future. And I think, when us three are doing a podcast in the middle of a supermarket aisle, like we plan to do in a Walmart in 20 years from now, we're going to be looking at a meat section that is plant-based and cultivated meat. I think that's where the future is.
I got to say that in 20 years from now, I plan to be eating plant-based meat on a beach somewhere. But if you guys want to be in a Walmart doing broadcasts on this, I'll be eating the stuff
we all have
somewhere
different
else.
dreams, Carrie.
Yeah, we do.
I'll have a virtual background because won't be able to go out of our house. Well, I'll have the beach.
Right, exactly, yeah.
We'll be able to do.
Oh, speaking of the not being able to go out of our house, Josh, can you talk a little bit about why you think COVID has kind of brought a lot of these issues to the forefront right now? I mean, it seems like, the trend was already pretty strong even before this moment, and beyond the issue of what we've seen around potential pandemics, there have been a whole lot of news stories about how frontline people working in factory farms are really impacted by this.
They have been, and it's very unfortunate. So some of the the worst hotspots, not only in the United States, but in the United States, looking upon just statistics globally speaking, are in American slaughterhouses. And that's where the hotspots for COVID have been. Now, why is that? Why are the hotspots in American slaughterhouses? Well, the reason why is that there's such horrible places to work already. I mean, we have people working shoulder to shoulder. Talk about you have to be 6 feet away from people.
Yeah.
There's basically like 3 people within 6 feet typically in slaughterhouses. And they are surrounded by blood, fecal matter, dander. The air is already so terrible that it breaks down your immune system. You're constantly bumping up against, machinery, other people. It is impossible to sanitize in any type of way. And so it's no surprise that there are massive outbreaks in these slaughterhouses. And, the industry, they're trying to cover this up. They're talking about, first of all, they call them processing plants. You hear that when they talk about it, processing plants? They don't like to use the term slaughter plants, which of course they are slaughter plants. But also what's happening too in terms of industry spin is that because the slaughter plants, for several weeks there was a peak, but it has been about several months, there have been slowdowns and sometimes shutdowns. It has caused a backlog of animals who were in factory farms who typically would be sent to slaughter. So now what's been happening is that factory farms, and this has been in the news a lot, have been what they have said euthanize their animals. I mean, this has made headlines all across the country. All these farms euthanizing animals, and these factory farm operators are crying how sad it is to do it. Well, do you know what type of spin this is? When we think of euthanize, we think of when we love our animal for her or his whole life. And at the end, when there are no good choices left, we bring our animal to the vet for the most peaceful ending to say goodbye. Yeah. That's what euthanizing is to society. That is what that word means. That's very critical.
Yeah, it literally means good death.
Yes,
yeah,
exactly.
That's the translation.
Exactly right. And so Animal Agriculture Alliance, which is basically like a big PR organization for the meat industry, they instructed the meat industry to not use the words kill or destroy, to instead use the word euthanize when describing what they're doing with the animals. So they've co-opted that word euthanize to talk about some of the most egregious methods of killing animals in factory farms because of the slaughterhouses being shut down. And so there have been investigations of this, of pigs who have been suffocated to death within their factory farm walls where the ventilation systems have been shut down. There have been steam pipes that have put in heat so animals would, in essence, boil alive. For chickens, they fire a hose on them that suffocates the birds with the foam. And so it's foam that's meant to take on fires. Instead, it's a hose that's firing foam to suffocate chickens. Of course, that's not euthanasia. That's cruelty to animals, and it's being done on such a massive scale. And that is one of the reasons, and you're right, Carrie, that people are starting to think like, wait a second, like this doesn't seem right. I don't understand this. Wait, hundreds of millions of animals potentially could be killed by these means. And what's going on with the slaughterhouses being hotbeds of activity for COVID? There's a system in place that's broken. And do you know what we say here in our organization, the Humane Society of the United States? This system has already been broken. COVID is exposing the fact that this system is broken, and people are paying attention.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Josh. I mean, it takes just this little extra, I mean, not that COVID is a little extra pressure, it's a substantial event, but it's one of those things that, when you have a broken system that is just sort of barely staggering along and you're not seeing all the points of places where it could really break, this is something that actually shows here's an actual breakdown.
It is a breakdown. It absolutely is a breakdown. And it's a breakdown not only in the food supply chain, but it exposes the morality of the factory farming industry as well. It really does. When the ones who are paying the price within the factory farm industry, who is it? It's the animals who are suffering gruesome fates, and it's the workers.
Yeah, the lowest paid, least empowered people in that system.
Exactly right. Exactly right. And so I think that says a lot about the industry. And I think that's one of the reasons why people are saying, hey, is this an industry I want to support? Maybe we should be eating more plant-based foods.
Mm-hmm.
When it comes to factory farming in general, we've been speaking a lot about chickens and pigs and cows and seeing the plant-based alternatives on the shelves there. One of the factory farmed animals that we haven't spoken about is fish in factory farming. So I'm wondering, is there a similar makeup in this field, and are we going to see plant-based alternatives for something like this? What have you seen in your experience, Josh?
Thank you for asking about fish, because they are the forgotten animals. And most of the animals who are killed in food production are fish. And there are literally trillions of these animals. And for wild fish, how they die is suffocating to death. And what is growing, unfortunately, what's called aquaculture, is basically water factory farming, where fish are just put in these giant human-made ponds, so thickly condensed with bodies of fish that you can barely look into the water without seeing a fish next to another fish next to another fish. They're piled on top of each other. It almost appears as if you can walk across the pond. There are so many fish, and their lives are just horrendous. They suffer from lice to such an extent that there are literally decades of conferences from the fishing industry about how to deal with sea lice, and they still can't figure it out. So these animals are suffering from lice. The lice eat away at their bodies, and eventually those who can survive that are killed in very cruel ways at the fish slaughterhouse. And so it's morbid, it's terrible what goes on to these poor animals. Now let me shift to some positive news about that, is that there are plant-based meats that are available. In fact, there are companies like Gardein have plant-based fish that's in the market. There's plant-based cultivated meat. Blue Nalu is a company that is focused specifically on producing that meat that we talked about earlier, focused on fish. And so I believe that there's hope for sure. You know what? There's a terminology that I think we hear a lot about, like sustainable fishing, or what fish are most sustainable? One of the best ways to sustain our oceanic ecosystem is to move away from eating those animals who are in the oceanic ecosystem to begin with. What we also have to remember is that, there is so much bycatch. So even if, let's say someone's like, hey, you know what, I'm just eating shrimp. Well, to catch shrimp, you're also catching fish, you're catching seals, you're catching birds, you're catching whales. In fact, so much of us fortunately cares a lot about whales, and we have decimated the whaling industry just from technology to move away from the oil that comes from the blubber, also from human morals have decided that, hey, we shouldn't be harming this species. Do you know what industry though kills whales by far more than any other? It's the industry of catching fish. And so if we really want to save the whales, we have to take steps to move away from eating as much fish as we do. So thank you for bringing that topic up. It's something that we should really discuss more. And as an organization, I know we're looking at how to address, especially aquaculture, more than has done in the past.
Josh, just out of curiosity, the thing you mentioned about the lice, like, is that more common in farmed animals just because of the proximity issue? Like they're so close to each other that the lice are more like, just transferred so easily?
Exactly.
Oh, so gross.
Exactly right. It's like, in the wild, they have literally the ocean. If there are
you can get away from lice. You can swim away
exactly
from
right.
lice.
Exactly right. And Carrie,
Yeah.
and if one fish has lice, they're not side by side with all the other fish that the lice just keep passing on.
Yeah,
yes,
it's like kids who have lice and they rub their heads together.
Right.
I mean, this is what fish are being forced to do, basically. That's super gross.
That's right. It is super gross. It is super gross. In fact, there are fish who, at the end of their lives, their faces have been eaten off by the lice while they're still alive, by the way. So it is gross. It's very sad. And you know what? Your comparison, what you made about lice, is the same reason why on land with factory farms, it's such a hotbed of activity for a disease outbreak. It's because, in the wild, one animal gets sick. Okay, not that many animals might get near the animal, and the animal might, pass away somewhere by her or himself. In a factory farm, one animal gets sick. You know, let's say one chicken factory farm. Let's say there's 10,000 birds. One bird gets sick. Guess what? Every other bird is right next to that bird or the bird after or the bird after, and then they all get sick. Yep. And that's why when the avian flu outbreak occurred in 2015, the largest avian flu outbreak in U.S. history, it went out. Do you know what? It didn't go after free-range birds at all or pasture birds. It went after the cage operations because the birds were packed in cages so small that birds can't spread their wings with 8 other chickens. Yep. And then they would get sick, pass it on the cage next to them, next to them, next to them. All of a sudden, tens of millions of birds either had avian flu or were killed by the egg industry to prevent the spread of avian flu. So yes, your comparison is very apt about whether it's lice or disease. It's one of the major reasons why raising animals in factory-like situations is so bad for them and also for ourselves too.
Yeah, it's like all the stuff that we're learning about social distancing during the pandemic is the exact thing that is completely not executed on a factory farm in any way.
Great point. We are doing the opposite of social distancing with animals in factory farms, the exact opposite. In fact, our work at HSUS is trying to create more social distancing for animals by abolishing the cages.
Yeah.
And so when we have banned these practices in states, when we wage these legislative campaigns to abolish the cage confinement of egg-laying hens or mother pigs or baby veal calves, we're giving them more space. Of course, it's better for the animals where they're not confined to the point they can't move, but it's also better to slow down any spread of disease. So we need to go from intensification of farm animals to more extensification of farm animals, giving animals more space.
Yeah, and all of these are really excellent points, not just unilaterally, but just environmental or health or for the animals. And so the folks listening to the podcast, they really appreciate the information. I'm listening and I say, wow, Josh, Carrie, brilliant. I get it. It was kind of epiphany moment. And now I want to go home to my family during Thanksgiving, during the holidays, where food is one of the most, brings everyone together, and you're always going to have a polarizing conversation. And I feel like this is the thing, that comes in. And so I'm so curious in your experience, or Carrie, I'd love to hear your experiences, or others that are listening, podcast@humanesociety.org. Let us know your experiences. But what is the best way to approach this with family members who might be hearing this for the first time, or who maybe have, kind of some hesitations about something like this? How do we
I'm sure Josh will have thoughts about this, but I feel like guilt tripping is definitely the way to go. Always incredibly effective. Like shaming, intensive shaming is really, I'll actually just before, because I know Josh will have some really good thoughts about this, but I can tell you, years ago when I first went vegetarian, I had a family member who said, seemed to be asking, why are you doing this? Like, what is your reasons for it? And really seemed to be very, very curious. And I generally avoid talking about it because I don't want to shame people, and people tend to get a little defensive about it now and then. Yeah. So I was like, oh, they seem to be really interested, and I will explain my reasons having to do with factory farming and the things that Josh talked about related to how it's completely inefficient to eat meat and et cetera. And so I was very politely explained it, and then they got to the end and they said, well, but you boil water and that kills amoebas, so what about that? So I was like, oh, we're having a different conversation than I thought.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
But you know what? If it's always starts defensive. It's okay. That's a good step. And I appreciate that they're caring for amoebas too, because if they care about amoebas, the largest death of amoebas is
I don't think they really care about the amoebas.
I know. I know. I'm just going along with their pretend care of our amoeba friends.
Yes.
And so if HSUS ever wants to have an amoeba outreach section, we know who to call.
Exactly.
So you know what? I was raised by a single dad who raised me and my brother eating meat pretty much every meal. And I'm the only one in my family who's vegan, let alone vegetarian. And so I hear that question. I really do. And I guess the first step for me is knowing like, hey, these are good people who I think they know the right thing to do, but it's a bit challenging at this point. So here's the steps that I've taken that I think could relate to anybody who's perhaps been in my situation. A couple of things. One is It's not about switching overnight. It's about introducing folks to new foods. For my dad, he's 78 years old. He's never changed his diet before. However, 78 years of eating meat, what I've done over the last couple of months is sent him plant-based foods via delivery services, because I'm hoping my dad stays home as much as possible these days. And so now he's actually eating for the first time more fruits, more vegetables, more whole grains, more beans. And so just that basic act of sending folks food that they perhaps haven't eaten in the past, and not make big judgment about it, not saying, hey, you got to change overnight now. Those steps help people. And what's happened is that my dad has lost 25 pounds in the last 2 months. His blood pressure has never been as good as it is now. He recently went to the doctor, and the doctor looked at him like, what have you been doing? You look great. I've never seen you like this. And my dad's like, yeah, I'm actually eating plant-based. And my dad, I don't think, has eaten meat in probably about a month and a half, and he doesn't miss it. And so what I would say is introducing folks to new foods. There's a lot of delicious plant-based meats out there that I think make a transition a lot easier. Back when I went vegetarian, like try to find plant-based meat, I would have to go to like the vegan section of a co-op or something like that. Carrie, I lived in Tacoma Park too. I would have to go like to Tacoma Park Co-op.
Yeah, it's like a magnet for HSUS people.
Exactly right. And so I would have to go in the corner and find something. But these days, every major grocery store in the United States has entire sections of plant-based meat. So whether it's Impossible or Beyond or Gardein or Morningstar or Boca, the list goes on of companies that offer products that make a transition a lot easier now than ever before. And you know what? For a lot of these products, many folks are saying that it's actually even more delicious than the meat they've eaten for years on end. That's really gotten boring. And I kind of look at it as kind of like a nicotine patch. Like, is eating like an Impossible Burger, Beyond Burger, like the healthiest thing in the world? Of course not. No burger is ever going to be the healthiest thing in the world. It's not as good as like a kale salad with fresh fruit and beans on it. Of course not. But you know what? To help folks make a transition, hey, let's give these products a shot. And so
yeah,
that's what I would recommend.
Let's not force them directly into the kale place. That's just cruel.
No way.
Right.
No. Not the K word.
Yeah, exactly.
Well,
exactly.
So, and what's so different about the plant-based milks then? Why has everybody gotten on that train? It just seems like it's,
Yes.
and all those are all over the shelves, and people have been trying it and are going crazy for that stuff.
You know what? That is a very good question. And here's what happened is that years ago, Dean Foods, which at the time was one of the largest dairy companies on the planet, it bought Silk. Silk was a tiny soy milk company at the time. And Dean Foods is like, hey, you know what? All the soy milk, it's on the shelf. It's not in the refrigerated section. What would it be like, because of our knowledge of the dairy section, to put Silk soy milk in the refrigerated case in the grocery store, right next to the dairy milks? And all of a sudden, soy milk skyrocketed. And then all of a sudden, restaurant chains were like, wait a second, we see it skyrocketing in grocery stores. Maybe we should offer it at our coffee places too. Then Starbucks became one of the largest purveyors of soy milk in the entire world because they started offering it. And to know what it is, it's just about ensuring these products are where people already go to shop. And so I'm so thrilled you asked that, because this is what's happening in the meat section too. Not only is every major grocery store offering plant-based meat, many of them are putting the plant-based meat in the actual meat section. So when everyday people like my brother, people like my dad, would go into the meat section, all of a sudden, for the first time, they say, wait a second, what is this Impossible Burger? What is this Beyond Sausage? What is this Gardein patty? And then they give these products a shot. So that has been a key in the plant-based milk industry. And that is also one of the reasons why plant-based meat is skyrocketing in our society now.
Well, I'll just bring some soy milk and some plant-based to the next Thanksgiving, and we'll be good. I think that's the way to go.
Awesome. We don't need to wait till Thanksgiving. I mean, we're doing this. I mean, Thanksgiving.
You got a 4th of July picnic in a couple of days, man.
Ship out some. Okay, got it.
You're talking 4 months. Listen, 4th of July. We're doing this before 4th of July. Hey, folks, bring some veggie sausage, veggie hot dogs, veggie burgers with you. Be a fun guest and just let people try it. Don't judge everything
from a distance.
else.
You have to throw it to them from a distance. They can, in fact, enjoy it.
Airdrop
it. You know what? I will say, as one of the eloquent advocates of plant-based meat, Snoop Dogg, has said recently,
Mm.
is that he has routinely fooled his friends by just giving them plant-based meat. And so, you know what? If Snoop Dogg can do it, if former presidents are eating more plant-based meat out to extend their lives, if professional athletes are shifting to plant-based meat, I mean, what a good collective group of people that are all moving in the same direction. You're trying to be healthier for themselves.
Great. Well, that's all I think we have for today's show. Josh Balk, thank you so much, Vice President of Farm Animal Protection for the Humane Society of the United States. Josh, as always, it's great to have you. Carrie, I think maybe round 3, we might have him back in the future. He did pretty good
We'll
today.
think about it. Yeah.
We'll think about it. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, he's pretty good.
We'll
I
let
like
you
that
know.
one.
Fantastic. I'd be honored. Well, Austin and Carrie, thank you for having me. I love the show. Long time listener, second time caller, I guess it would be. And so I'm looking forward to more episodes to come.
Absolutely. Yeah, so to find out more info about our plant-based future, you know where to find us, humanesociety.org. Check out all the information that you need, and feel free to let us know any other questions you have and your personal stories. I want to hear from you all what you shipped to your family on 4th of July from a safe distance, what plant-based meals your family fell in love with. So, all right, that's it for today, right, folks? I think we're good. Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Awkward silence. See you.